Welcome to Hospice Explained. This podcast is intended as an educational aid and is only a resource to begin to understand the end-of-life season. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please always seek advice from your physician or qualified members of your healthcare team with any questions regarding a medical condition.
Hello and welcome to Hospice Explained. This is episode number 149. I'm your host, Marie Betcher RN. I'm a former hospice RN, and I started this podcast to help continue the education for families and patients about hospice and the end-of-life season. Hospice Explained is now partnering with Cloud9 Care System. When patients remain in the same position for extended periods, they're at high risk for developing pressure injuries, commonly known as bed sores. The Cloud9 Care System is designed with patients and caregivers in mind. It consists of a unique double-layer sheet, both layers featuring low friction and moisture wicking properties. The top layer is strategically stitched to the bottom layer to create pockets that hold pillows, wedges, and other inserts in place. This is all made to minimize friction and shear. If you think you are interested in purchasing the Cloud9 Care System, please let them know Hospice Explained sent you. You can reach out to cloud9care.com or you can reach out to me, Marie, at hospiceexplained.com. On this episode, I am interviewing Sara Ecklein. After witnessing a loved one's final days, Sara connected with her personal mission to provide healing and calm to people during their end-of-life transition. She has been a private fiduciary for 10 years, and with fewer than 1,000 licensed fiduciaries in California, stands out by turning the overwhelming task of elder care into a structured, peaceful process for the whole family. Sara works hands-on with families that have aging parents or elders who can no longer care for themselves, helping them through the intricate processes of conservatorships, special needs trusts, and long-term care planning so they can leave behind legacies of love. Sara has a strong track record of handling highly complex cases and also working in senior care as a volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association and Sacramento Hospice Consortium. Welcome, Sara Ecklein, a private fiduciary specializing in trust administration and host of the Legacy of Love podcast, to Hospice Explained.
Marie, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you and speaking to your audience.
Oh, thank you so much, Sara. Sara, why don't you just start by telling us all about yourself?
Yeah, well, I think this will resonate, especially with you and with your listeners. So my path to the work that I do really started with death and being witness to a loved one's final 3 days in life. And it had just a profound impact on me. I would say in some ways it was a spiritual experience. And really kind of my overall takeaway and noticing was, the gift of death. And I found myself really leaning in to her whole journey of dying. And there's a lot of contrast in that time where you see most people leaning away from death, right? I think collectively we can see where we're a death denying culture.
100%.
Yeah. So I didn't know it then, but there ended up being a cascade of events after that death where, within 2 months, I left a dead end job. I left a dead end relationship. I moved back in with my mother, and the plan at the time was to become a hospice nurse. And so I started going back to school and quickly realized that nursing wasn't quite the right fit. And my path landed me to working for a professional fiduciary. And really, the rest is history. So most people are probably going to ask and think, okay, what the heck is a professional fiduciary? That's definitely what I didn't know about the profession until I started doing the work. End of life care is definitely an aspect to the work. And I would say at the end of the day of what I do, I carry out people's final wishes. So that end of life piece is a thread through each of my clients' stories, whether they're still alive or they've now passed.
I love it because your goal was to become a nurse and to work with hospice patients. What a fine goal, but yet you were led to do something different. It's the piece that fits for you.
Yeah, I had cooked professionally for a few years. And so I already knew I didn't want to get into a career that required so much of my body because honestly, even in my 20s, my body felt like it was breaking down from cooking. And, now it seems, kind of obvious, but until doing, the classes and working in skilled nursing facilities, I hadn't quite realized how labor intensive and how you're on your feet all day nursing is. So that was really kind of a clear distinction where I knew, okay, a lot of this connects, a lot of this is what I love. A lot of this feels like so intuitive and I'm able to step in and be that, that caregiver, that presence, that unconditional love. That's so much of what I love about death is just that the presence that comes and time slips away. But the labor piece, the being on your feet all day, I was like, this isn't it. I don't want to get into this.
It's okay. If people don't know, I did not realize how physically intensive nursing could be. It's just you're running the hospital halls. I worked in the actual hospital building, inpatient for 30 plus years and did outpatient periodically or, then when I did hospice, that's outpatient. You see some patients in the hospital, but you're still walking the halls and moving people up and down in bed, helping them stand to go to the bathroom. There is a lot of physical. And nursing also is emotional and spiritual
Yeah.
because you're so empathetic with your patients and their loved ones, but also just, the brain work, the mental, physical, spiritual. It's kind of a combo job.
Um,
Sorry, side roll. Sorry.
no, don't apologize. I mean, that resonates and it still resonates with my work now. I think even for me, my practice has been bringing ritual, to saying goodbye to clients,
Right. That makes sense.
bringing that ritual and really saying a thank you for coming into my life. I don't know if you've had Barbara Carnes on the podcast, but she wrote the hospice.
Recently. Yeah.
Yeah, she was the one that really brought that to my awareness, and I already had some sort of ritual going, saying goodbye to clients, but I hadn't quite had that, that really out loud saying thank you for coming in my life. And I don't know, I feel a difference saying it. So, it works for me. So hopefully if there's other professionals listening, it'll work for them too.
I think that is a very unique something to do. I remember actually saying something similar to my parents several years before either one of them were on their true end of life journey. I remember thinking, I just need to tell them they were good parents. They weren't perfect, but they were good parents and I love them. And, I grew up to be a
Mm.
decent adult, values and professional life that they are very tickled to have me as a nurse, as their daughter.
Oh.
So, Sarah, why don't you tell us exactly what a fiduciary is and how that differs from other people that work with finances?
Yeah. So, well, I'm in California, and California, no surprise, does things a little differently. And we have this small profession called private professional fiduciaries. And there's an actual license. We're overseen by the Professional Fiduciary Bureau, and that's a part of the Consumer Affairs. So, my license allows for me to act in many different roles. So I describe the term professional fiduciary as an umbrella term. And under that, I can act as someone's guardian or conservator. I can act as a trustee, and I can act as an agent under the power of attorney for finance, or also as a healthcare decision maker. And in my practice, I really specialize in trust administration and and also this area called special needs trusts. So working with clients in the planning phase, honestly, is really very much of what inspired me to launch my podcast and also come onto other podcasts and have more conversations. Because after doing this work for over a decade and, sitting down with clients, or I should say, not even clients, like prospects, people are interviewing me to potentially name me in successor roles in their estate planning documents. So when a prospect's interested in potentially working with me, they would name me in successor roles in their trust as successor trustee, and often also as a backup agent in their power of attorney documents, and then sometimes also as another agent in their healthcare directive. So, time and time again, I'm sitting down with either my clients or prospects, and I realize that there is this huge gap in the industry, and people are not really understanding what an estate plan actually is. And that's what's really gotten me like lit up, because 1 in 3 people actually have an estate plan in place in the United States. 1 in 3 people. And that's just not enough. In my ideal world, there would be everyone would see the importance and execute those documents. But currently there's just 1 in 3 people with their estate plan in place. And so, Marie, with the people that I'm sitting down and meeting, this is the 1/3 that are ahead of most. And even with this population, with this pool, people aren't really quite understanding what the estate plan is. And so frequent questions that I'm, coming up against with is clients are assuming, and only thinking after their death. And I would say that about half of them are thinking this way. And so I'm the one that's raising the question, well, what about incapacity? What about who would you want to be your power of attorney in the event your spouse is unable to act for you? And time again, I'm just left with, a response like, oh, I haven't thought about that. My assumption was that these are conversations that are being had with attorneys, with the client's attorney. And I'm kind of left with, I think that these conversations aren't being had, the time hasn't been taken, or if the conversations are being had, the information is just kind of going over the client's head. So that's where I think collectively we need to be better informed about what an estate plan actually is. And then, really, the other piece, which I'm sad to say, is that the estate plan is really just the starting point. It's where we start, but there's so much more that goes in. When I see the clients where things go well, things go according to plan, and I would say more times than not, things don't. And like life gets messy. So,
So, Sarah, there's somebody that's going to administrate your will for advanced directives and somebody for your medical. Do you want to explain that a little better?
yeah. So, this is where, first off, I want to start with that probate law. This is considered probate law. It's going to be state specific. So, for your listeners, working with a professional estate planning attorney, preferably based in your state, is really an important piece. So I can speak, best to the laws in California because that's really where I practice. So most people decide to establish a trust, especially if they own real estate. Our threshold for probate just changed, but previous to this year, it was if you had 180,000 and some change and more, your estate would go through probate. And we really wanted to, most people want to avoid that. It's expensive. B, it delays things. And C, it's also not private. All of these documents are public, and so that's where establishing a trust for most families makes sense. If you own a house, like, there's few homes that are under that number.
Right.
It's recently increased to, I think it's around 700,000 or 780, but even with that, there's a lot of caveats. So again, working with an attorney to assess what you need is an important piece. But really, the estate plan has many different documents, trust being one, a will being another, and then your power of attorney for finance. And then I call it your advanced healthcare directive. There also could, some people say, a power of attorney for healthcare. But your trust, we can start with, really is in an existence when you were alive, and then during incapacity, and then after you pass. So there can be really this continuity, and the players will kind of change, based on your ability, and maybe inability to act as trustee. But power of attorney documents are really only in effect as long as someone's alive. So it does a lot. They do a lot, especially with that healthcare decision making piece. I mean, that's what's, I think, so important, and especially for, I'm assuming listeners that are listening to Hospice Explained, having that advanced healthcare directive. It's, communicating who would have that power to make medical decisions on your behalf in the event you were unable to do, but it's also communicating what your wishes are. So that being said, that's kind of another piece of what I'm finding in my practice of what goes really well is that we're not executing these documents once and never thinking about it again and shoving it in the drawer and not communicating our wishes to our loved ones. And unfortunately, I think this is happening more times than not. Again, I think so much of the denial of death, right?
Yes. Yes.
Denial of death is, I think, a big piece why. And I really see that our estate plan is kind of like this perfect storm of, requiring us to look at our own mortality,
Yep.
requiring us to talk about money and things and who gets what.
That's hard.
And then also it touches on our relationships and our families, and maybe the lack of family or the lack of support.
Right.
And I think, I've stolen this line from my therapist, but all families are really dysfunctional at the end of the day. It's a spectrum of dysfunction.
It's a spectrum. I think that's a great one. I like that. It's true because we all have our highs, lows, and our good points and our bad points and our bad points in the day. And, some people are, it's like when a morning person's married to a night person.
Yes. That's true in my marriage.
Yet I think what you've got to say is so much good information because you're right. People need this. They need to have this stuff in place. And one of the things that really drove me to make sure I had all this stuff was watching a loved one go through thinking there was a will. There was no will.
Uh, yeah. Well, I think, unfortunately, I think most of us, whether that's happened to someone in our life or we've heard of someone, we hear of these worst case scenarios, and yet most of us don't plan better. We don't do better. And so I think it's, having conversations like this is where it's like, I love podcasting because there's, bringing this, this topic to light where it's like most times people are only talking about this and sometimes they're not at all, with their loved one, with their immediate family, and then maybe with an attorney if they felt, the need to hire one. But I think another piece is most people are intimidated by attorneys. They don't know what it's going to cost. And, working with an attorney can, again, I think there's an intimidation for most people. So that's where, I think now, downstream and doing this work for over a decade, I've seen, the attorneys that you want to work with are willing to take the time and break this down and make things understandable and digestible for the client. It's not, don't ask me any questions and I'll take care of it for you. I think we really need to stop outsourcing our power to professionals, and I say that as a professional trustee.
Nice.
I think the more that we're aware of what the plan is, communicating those wishes to our loved ones, but then also to our team of professionals that we're working with, the more that you can do, in your control and your ability and your power when you have capacity, that making sure that this plan is going to be a success. And so that's a big piece.
I want to add that I do agree that a lot of people are very intimidated by, attorneys, but let's think about it this way. This is an attorney you're hiring for you. You're hiring it to protect you and your estate and protect your children from not losing the money that you've set aside for them or losing the properties or losing something. Or if you're giving the gift to charity, it really doesn't matter, but you're protecting that interest. And then these attorneys are understanding that maybe you don't have all the money up front. Maybe they'll take payments, and then when you finish paying it off, then they'll release your documents. Have a conversation with them, right? What's that going to hurt?
Yeah, yes, yeah. And my experience is most estate planning attorneys, at least in California, again, are charging a flat fee. And I think most are offering some kind of payment plan. It's not, due all at once up front. So that's, I think that you bring up a good point, and calling around. But again, I think the relationship is a really important piece. You should feel like you can ask any stupid question.
Right.
Not that there's any stupid questions, because it's complicated.
Right.
It really is. And the thing is that laws and tax codes are always changing. And so your estate plan is also going to be changing. So that's kind of the other piece of this, is that, you know, our, our when we're talking about planning a legacy, we're again I want people to move away from thinking, oh, we're going to set up this plan and, meet with the attorney once and shove the documents in the drawer and never talk about it or think about it again. I really think that it's something that we can begin to tend to and cultivate on a regular basis. And not that, we're updating our documents all the time, but it is going to look something like anywhere from 3 to 5. I can't anticipate it'll go longer than a decade without needing an update.
Very good idea. Really wise.
And I think it's also the families where the plan, you know, the plan is executed and it's executed well. It's when it's not a surprise.
Yeah.
It is when,
Yeah.
everyone, all the important people, the people part of the plan, when there's either a medical crisis or a sudden death, it shouldn't be, oh, surprise, you're, the trustee or you're, the healthcare decision maker. These are people that and families where they're regularly talking about, okay, during incapacity, these are my last wishes, or this is my intent, or this is what I would picture, a good death to look like. And making sure that, their proxies, most people aren't going to need to work with me, the professional fiduciary. Most people are naming, their family, whether it's their children or a sibling or a entrusted friend in these roles. And I think part of that is setting them up for success, setting them up for success. So there's a lot that we can do. And I do believe it starts, kind of at the dinner table.
It does. It does.
I mean, these dinner table conversations, and it's something that's, you know, continuing to happen, ongoing. There's a culture in these families where this is something that we talk about. And really, I think this is the greatest gift that we can give to, to our loved one, to our families. This is very much of what inspired the name of my podcast, The Legacy of Love, because I believe that, with making the decision to being intentional with how we plan for our incapacity and our death, it has ripples, not only for the next generation, but for that entire family line. I mean, you leave things so much different if you never talked about it, you weren't willing to talk about it, and then after your death, you leave not only a mess and a ton of work for people to figure out, where are the assets, what bills do you have, where do we need to close the accounts, but also of a lot of times what happens, I would say more times than not, if the conversations weren't had proactively, there's hurt feelings. And I think worst case scenario, you see families torn apart, fighting it out in court, and, estrangement. And boy, that just has an impact for lifetimes.
It's so sad. It is. It's so sad. And you're right. It does. And it complicates grieving. Then you become mad at this person. Mom, why didn't you do it better? Why, Dad, why didn't you do this? Or Uncle so and so, why did you leave us such a mess?
Yeah. And like our brains just, what our brain does is we have to make up the stories. So there can also be, if a conversation was never had, there can be a lot of suspicion. There can be a lot of story around, oh, you were always mom's favorite. This is why things look this way. And that may never have been the piece. That's just the story that we tell ourselves. And, going back to kind of where we started earlier is that, all families are dysfunctional. It's just a spectrum of dysfunction. So when you layer that, the stories that we tell ourselves, any family dysfunction with grief and loss and money, of course things are going to be a mess if we aren't, spending the time to proactively plan, and also the willingness to have the hard conversations.
I really agree. Thank you so much, Sarah. What a great way to just dial it in to talk about all these different pieces and that there's people out there to help. And you even work so much with your clients that you thank them, for being part of the end of their lives. And I think that's beautiful. Well, thank you, Sarah, so much for being on Hospice Explained. Sarah is again the host of the Legacy of Love podcast and a private fiduciary. Sarah, how can my audience reach out to you?
Yeah, so you can find me on my website. So that's trustandhonor.co. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active on social media. So direct messages work there, but also going to my website, there's a contact page if any listeners are having follow-up questions, need some support. I will say that, it seems like for the most part, working, specific in the state, if someone is interested in working with a professional fiduciary. So if you're in California, it's worth reaching out. But if you're in another state, I can also leave a resource for listeners, and you can search for professionals based on your state. And that is the National Guardians Association. And Marie, I'm happy to share a link so that you can include that in the show notes.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you so much, Sarah.
Marie, I appreciate this. And I think one last piece, I have a free resource for listeners. It's called the Legacy of Love Workbook. And it's really more of an exercise, regardless of where people are at in their estate planning journey. They might already have an estate plan. It could be even before you've executed it, but it's really a workbook so that we really can get clear about our core values and really think about the legacy that we want to leave behind. So I'll also include that. You can include that in the show notes, a link to download that free resource for listeners.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah, so much.
Marie, thank you. This has been just so much fun.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for joining me on Hospice Explained. Think about ways you can make a difference in someone's life. Also, please subscribe and share this podcast with anyone who would benefit from listening. Thank you.